Between 1911 and 1912, a shadowy figure stalked the streets of Atlanta, brutally murdering young women and leaving their bodies in the dark. The killings were eerily similar to Jack the Ripper's crimes in London decades earlier, but this time, the victims were predominantly black women, leading many to believe that authorities didn't care enough to stop him. Was the Atlanta Ripper ever caught? Or did he simply disappear into the night? Welcome to Mystery Trails, where we uncover chilling true crime, baffling disappearances, and unexplained events across the U.S. If you love a good mystery, be sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share with your friends to help us grow. Now, let's start exploring the unknown together and dive on into the story. In the early 1900s, Atlanta was a city on the rise. The skyline stretched higher, industry boomed, and businesses flourished. But beneath the prosperity, beneath the hum of progress and ambition, something sinister lurked in the darkness. It began on May 28, 1911. A young woman named Belle Walker, just 22 years old, was found near her home. Her throat slashed so deeply that her head was nearly severed from her body. The brutality of the crime was shocking, but police treated it as an isolated act of violence, a tragic murder in an otherwise thriving city. Then, only weeks later, another woman was found dead. And another. And another. By the time summer drew to a close, the streets of Atlanta pulsed with fear. Women clutched their shawls tighter when the sun set. Families locked their doors, whispering about the unseen horror that prowled the night. A serial killer was on the loose. No one knew who he was, where he would strike next, or why he was targeting these women. The city had faced crime before, but nothing like this. Nothing so deliberate, nothing so monstrous. The bodies left behind by the killer painted a grim picture of his methods. The women were young, black or mixed race, many of them walking home alone when the killer found them. He struck under the cover of night, moving through the city streets like a shadow, waiting for the right moment to strike. Each victim was found with her throat slashed, the deep gash often accompanied by multiple stab wounds to the chest. Some of the attacks were so violent that the women were nearly decapitated. Belle Walker had been the first, her life stolen on a quiet May evening. Then came Emma Lou Sharp, murdered in June. Mary Putnam, only 25, was discovered lifeless in July. Lena Sharp, a woman of 40, met the same fate that same month. By August, Alice Williams had joined the list of the dead, and these were only the women officially recorded. Some believe the true number was far higher, more than 20 victims, each one erased by the same unseen hand. But the killings weren't just horrifying because of their brutality. They exposed something deeper. The victims were black women, and their disappearances, their violent deaths, did not command the urgency they should have. Some whispered that if these had been wealthy white women, if their names carried power, the police would have moved faster, would have fought harder to stop the slaughter. Instead, the streets ran red, and the killer kept striking. As the murders continued, fear spread through Atlanta like an unchecked wildfire. Women stopped going out after dark, even if it meant missing work or leaving their families hungry. Husbands and fathers armed themselves, forming neighborhood patrols to guard their homes. The whispers of a faceless predator stalking the city grew louder with every passing day. The newspapers seized on the hysteria, splashing terrifying headlines across the front pages. The killer was compared to Jack the Ripper, the legendary murderer who had terrorized London decades earlier. The name took hold, the Atlanta Ripper, and with it, the city's sense of dread grew deeper. Then finally, police made their first arrest. The law grasped at suspects, desperate to put an end to the panic. But despite multiple arrests, despite interrogations and trials, the killings did not stop. The truth behind the Atlanta Ripper was as elusive as the man himself. One theory suggested a single man was responsible for all of the deaths, a predator who watched from the shadows, learning his victims' routines, waiting until they were alone. The consistency of the attacks, the methodical slashing of the throat, the choice of victims, everything pointed to the work of a lone, calculated killer. But if it was one man, why was he never caught? Some believed that the murders were not the work of a single individual, but rather a series of attackers, perhaps copycats feeding off the hysteria. Some of the killings bore slight differences, suggesting multiple hands at work. And in a city still divided by race, some wondered if the panic had provided the perfect cover for racist white men to target black women without raising suspicion. Then there was the theory that the killer had, in fact, been caught, but for another crime entirely. In July 1911, a man named Henry Huff was arrested in connection with the murder of Lena Sharp. Witnesses had reported seeing him acting strangely in the area before her death. He was questioned. Accused even confessed. But the details didn't match the full string of killings, and many believed he was nothing more than a scapegoat, a man pulled from the streets simply to ease the public's fear. Then, in 1912, another man, Todd Henderson, was taken into custody. And just as suddenly as they had begun, the killings stopped. Had the Atlanta police unknowingly captured the Ripper? Or had the real killer simply moved on to a new hunting ground? By 1913, the reign of terror had come to an abrupt end. The bodies stopped appearing. The streets, once filled with anxious glances and hushed voices, began to settle. Atlanta tried to move on. But there was no resolution. There was no trial, no moment of relief when the guilty man was dragged before a judge. There was no confession, no final answer to who had haunted the city's nights. Did the killer die? Was he arrested for something unrelated, buried behind bars while the world remained unaware of the blood he had spilled? Or did he leave Atlanta behind, slipping into the shadows of another city, searching for new victims? The truth vanished with him. The Atlanta Ripper is one of America's oldest unsolved serial murder cases, a mystery buried beneath a century of lost evidence and forgotten voices. His victims were young women, stolen from the streets under cover of darkness, their stories overshadowed by time and indifference. His identity remains unknown. His final body count is uncertain. And the most chilling question of all, did he stop killing, or did he simply find a new place to hunt? The answers may be lost to history, and unless new evidence emerges, we may never know. So what do you think? Was the Atlanta Ripper a single killer, or were multiple murderers involved? Could he have been caught under a different name? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If you love terrifying true crime cases, eerie unsolved mysteries, and chilling disappearances, be sure to subscribe to Mystery Trails. Every week we explore cases that leave behind more questions than answers. And don't go anywhere just yet. Our next story takes us even deeper into the unknown. Click the next video and I'll see you there. Until next time, stay curious and stay safe.